Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
Defense spending comes into focus as the U.S. goes back to war with Iran. Welcome to the Wednesday edition as President Trump heads for Pennsylvania today to take part in a defense industry conference just as the Aspen Security Forum gets underway in Colorado. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz here in Washington, reminding us, Kailey, it's not only about how we are using weapons in places like the Middle East or Ukraine, but which weapons we're using.
Yeah, as the face of warfare changes and increasingly the U.S. has to position itself for the threat of drones, maybe trying to make some cheaper things to shoot down cheaper threats that, of course, are being posed as we speak to U.S. forces in the Middle East, as we are seeing once again a volleying of strikes between the U.S. and Iran. It is now the fifth day that the U.S. has been conducting these renewed operations against Iran, and the president warned in an interview yesterday that they will only get more intense and potentially target civilian infrastructure like bridges and power plants next week if Iran doesn't come back to the negotiating table. That's
on the menu for next week, according to the president. As far as today goes, we're watching a very difficult debate over the NDAA, the Annual Defense Authorization Bill on Capitol Hill. President wants $1.5 trillion for the Pentagon this year, and he's looking at a couple of different vehicles to do that. But the shopping list is already being drawn up. And over the course of this hour, we're going to talk about that with our Tyler Kendall, who is in position in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, where the president also will be taking place in a roundtable, talking about procurement reform and exactly what we should be investing all this money in.
We also have to talk about how busy of a day it is on Capitol Hill, not just because of the NDAA or the budget reconciliation package that Republicans in the House are trying to get together, but also because we had a lot of testimony in the Senate today. Kevin Warsh, day 2 before the Banking Committee, but also the confirmation hearings for the president's nominee to be Attorney General Todd Blanche and the next Director of National Intelligence in Jay Clayton. Both of those were pretty tough hearings.
Some tenuous questioning for sure, some tenuous moments, some drama came out of these with obviously partisan interests. Kailey, most people seem to think that they will both be confirmed. When it comes to Todd Blanche, might be a little bit closer than Republicans consider comfortable.
Yeah, so we'll get into that this hour. But of course, we also have to check on the markets, as we always do at the very beginning. And for that, we turn to Charlie Pellet up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Kailey and Joe. Indeed, a choppy session on Wall Street. We are back in the green right now, barely on the S&P. Let's get right to the numbers here. A lot of moving parts to this market. S&P 500 index higher by 1 point right now, little changed. We are seeing a rout in chip makers. The SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange Semiconductor Index, down 3.8%. NASDAQ 100 down almost 1% right now. The Dow up 0.1%. NASDAQ higher by 0.1%. And again, the NASDAQ 100 index down by just about 1%. We've got the 10-year currently yielding 4.54%. The 2-year 4.13% with Kevin Warsh on Capitol Hill. Spot gold down $15 the ounce to $4,037, drop there of 0.4%. West Texas Intermediate crude bouncing around flat right now, $79.35 a barrel. Brent, the global benchmark, $84.70. It is down by just under 0.1%. SpaceX shares currently trading at $134.53. That means SpaceX is now below its IPO price of $135. Sources tell Bloomberg the New York Yankees are in advanced talks to raise nearly $3 billion of financing from Apollo Global Management as more institutional capital flows into pro sports. Again, little change right now for West Texas Intermediate crude, $79.34 a barrel. Taking a look at oil majors, they are trading lower. ExxonMobil right now down 1.4%. Chevron down 1.1%. ConocoPhillips lower by 1.1% as well. Recapping, S&P 500 index flat on the day. Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. Live in New York today. And we're live here in Washington, where, as we mentioned, it's a busy day on Capitol Hill, not just because of hearings, confirmation, and otherwise that are happening on Capitol Hill, but also as Republicans are trying to rally around a budget blueprint that would provide for a third reconciliation package that includes $73 billion to pay for costs related to the Iran war. The Vice President, J.D. Vance, is actually going to head to the Hill himself today to make the case for this. And of course, Joe, $73 billion, really just a drop in the bucket when we consider the asks this administration is making of Congress when it comes to defense related to spending.
That's true. That we should note this price tag got bigger. It's at $95 billion now for the full framework that was outlined with ever more for defense, 60 billion, 12 billion, 13 that would be instructed by committees to dole out as well. Farmers get a piece of this, and as far as the Save America Act goes, it instructs House Republicans to enact as much of it as possible. That's a little bit difficult to quantify at this moment.
Yeah, keeping in mind that there are restrictions in the Senate. The parliamentarian has to rule that any measure within this is budgetary in nature,
right.
Hence why this is going to maybe look more like grants for states to implement things like voter ID and proof of citizenship rather than just the wide piece of legislation the president wants to see get done, the Save America Act.
We're also looking at the NDAA, the Annual Defense Authorization Act, that has ground to a halt here, with Democrats seeing this as a red or a green light for operations in Iran, it seems. This is a must pass, as we always hear each year, and something that we'll be following closely. It also includes an element that would prevent defense contractors from buying back their own stocks. But it brings us to this moment in time with the Aspen Security Forum underway, where they're talking about strategy, and spending is a big part of the conversation at the Pennsylvania Defense and Innovation Summit. That's getting underway today as well, with the help of Senator David McCormick, who is running this, bringing together, as he says, defense and tech leaders, including senior military commanders, industry CEOs, also a president of the United States. Donald Trump will be there a little bit later on today to take part in a roundtable. And Bloomberg's Washington correspondent Tyler Kendall has made her way to Carlisle to be part of this conversation, traveling with the president, and joins us right now with a special guest. Tyler, take it away.
Thanks so much, Joe. As you mentioned, I am joined by a special guest, the chair and president of the U.S. Export-Import Bank, John Jovanovic. John, it is so nice to see you again here at the summit, where we are talking about bolstering the U.S. defense industrial base. So let's just start broadly. How can export financing for commercial, dual-use domestic defense manufacturers help when it comes towards meeting that supply that our allies are looking at? And how are you thinking about replenishing stockpiles, even if it's indirectly?
So one of the best things about revitalizing XM has been figuring out ways where our financial tools can help bring about not just supply chain security, energy security domestically for everyday Americans, but how we can be great partners with our allies all around the world. So what really came down to it is President Franklin Roosevelt started XM in 1934. And the reasons he founded the bank then rhyme with all the challenges that we're trying to meet today. So number one, how do we help American companies win all around the globe? And I can tell you right now, we've never had more demand to partner with U.S. technology, to get U.S. industry involved in every single bit of growth projects all around the planet. Number two, energy security. How can we help bring American energy molecules and technologies to every corner of the globe? Number three, supply chain security. Things like Project Vault, supply chain resiliency, Make More in America. These are things that become so foundational to economic and national security. And last but not least, you may not think about a 92-year-old sleepy institution like XM as being focused on winning in the industries in the future, but when it comes to global AI exports, dual-use technologies, which we're talking a lot about here today, advanced mobility, these are areas where we're trying to help ensure that we can not just innovate in America, but that we can iterate, manufacture, and deliver.
Part of what's adding to the urgency is, of course, the conflict in Iran. And yesterday we saw President Trump move off of a threat for a 20% reimbursement fee and instead says that regional allies are going to invest in the U.S. when it comes to trade and financing deals. I'm curious, can you give us any context here? Are these new investments or building on commitments that we've already gotten?
Look, what the president's doing in Iran is long overdue. What I can tell you about XM's role is that we're focused on delivering energy dominance, which involves not just energy security all across America, because I'll tell you what, if you are a state in America, like Pennsylvania, like Texas, like Louisiana, that enjoys a lot of energy exports, you also have low cost of electricity for all of your residents. But it's also about bringing about energy technology that we have to every corner of the globe. And so it's more than energy security, though, when you think about what it takes to respond to a global environment like the one we're in today. It's also about fostering next generation innovation like we have here today. It's about supply chain security, because no matter what you're trying to build and deliver, having the foundational building blocks in terms of critical raw materials is absolutely essential. And that's why what Dave and Dina McCormick have done here, convene capital providers, innovators, some of the largest companies, but also those who really are bringing and infusing innovation into the equation, That's what's most important, and that's where XM has found new life in our revitalization.
Well, how has the conflict in Iran perhaps mobilized capital to regional partners who may be thinking a little bit differently now about a reliance on the Strait of Hormuz or their own defense capabilities and holes within them?
It's funny, what we've seen is a continuation of what we experienced even before the conflict broke out, which was people coming to us at XM and saying, we want to partner with American energy technology. We want to procure American energy molecules, understanding that that's the best way to build a long-term strategic relationship. We want nuclear technology to be front and center. We want to partner with American SMRs or American large-scale reactors. And what it comes down to is that buying American is a good bet for building your future. And so what we want to do is allow everyday working class Americans to have more well-paying jobs, to have the opportunity to continue to flourish, all the while we deliver American goods, services, and technologies to every corner of the globe.
And part of this is the evolving nature of technology and AI. It's my understanding that you've just launched an initiative that would essentially help to fast track these tech exports. Can you talk to me about what the demand has been like?
Absolutely. So, thanks to the president's leadership, he issued a global AI export plan, which the Export-Import Bank we were very proud to be a part of. Now, I will say that we were the first federal agency named in the executive order that's delivered, right? So we've revamped an entirely new export program specifically tailored to the AI tech stack. And we've learned our lesson from 5G, from the telecom space only a few years ago, to understand that we needed to pivot and innovate right before we had this onslaught of demand. Because what I can tell you is every country that comes and meet with us, every company from around the world, one of the first things they ask is, how can we partner with American AI? Right? They're not just asking the president, they're asking us too. And so we want to be a frontline economic tool that allows the American technology stack to win and to be brought to every corner of the globe. Because it's not just AI. AI is going to be a foundational part of every single industry, and we want to make sure American companies win.
I understand the demand, but we're also seeing in some ways growing concern from European allies about being too reliant on U.S. tech, perhaps highlighted by the fact that the U.S. Commerce Department imposed and then lifted those export controls related to Anthropic's most advanced technology. I was just speaking with the Palantir CTO about how the French government moved to cut ties with that company in a bid to bolster their own technology. I'm wondering how you're thinking about financing technology that could be restricted overnight.
Well, what I can tell you is that we are inundated with demand for American technology partnerships, but also if you think about what it takes to deliver on the promise of AI, it's a brick and mortar process, right? It requires molecules, it requires processing, it requires infrastructure, and so all of those things are traditionally things that XM has focused on. And so from our perspective, we want American companies to win. We want us to be able to deliver a promise, because delivering an AI future is one that you and I want to be comfortable with, is going to ensure that these industries thrive for many more years to come.
In the final few minutes, I have you just quickly first on Project Volt, which you did mention at the top. Can you give us an update on how that is going when it comes to building up that critical minerals stockpile? Any sort of update that the market could be looking for?
Yeah, it's great. So Project Vault, for your viewers at home, was actually an initiative that President Trump announced in early February, where the Export-Import Bank partnered with the private sector to be able to bring about a strategic reserve for critical raw materials. And so we're very pleased to say that it's being operationalized. Project Vault has executive leadership in place. Brett Lampert, someone who's a career veteran, dedicated his entire career to supply chain security and resiliency, and so we're making great strides there.
And then final question, can you just talk to me about how you're thinking about institutional independence? Because there have been some questions raised, including by Senator Elizabeth Warren, about one financing deal that has alleged ties to the Trump family. How do you maintain institutional independence?
Look, process is key at XM. Every single applicant that comes through the door has the exact same process, and what we can tell you is that we're wide open for business, but the bottom line is that the foundational elements of every deal have to pass muster, and we're very, very comfortable with what we do all day, every day.
All right, the president and chairman of the U.S. Export-Import Bank, John Jovanovic, thank you so much for joining us here live on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Joe and Kailey, this has been a conversation on the sidelines of the Pennsylvania Defense Summit, and I'll send it back to you.
All right, great work. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, thank you so much. And we'll be checking it back in with Tyler throughout the day here on Bloomberg TV and radio. She brings us great interviews from the summit. And interesting for Tyler to end there on the idea of institutional independence. It's something we've been hearing a lot about on Capitol Hill over the last few days, including from the Fed chair, Kevin Warsh, who had to repeatedly tell members of both the House and Senate that he will maintain independence from the president and not answer to him directly when it comes to rates. But the nominees who had to testify today as well face similar questions. The acting attorney general who wants to become the attorney general, Todd Blanche, had to talk about not being the president's friend or his lawyer any longer. And of course, the man who was tapped to lead the nation's intelligence services, Jay Clayton, was asked repeatedly about whether he's going to be willing, Joe, to face the president and give him tough information and potentially go against him in the Oval Office, which is why so many Democrats in particular were pressing him on the question of whether or not Trump won or lost the 2020 election, but the idea being that the intelligence is going to inform many of the president's decisions, including, of course, what is ongoing in the Middle East as we speak.
Well, that's true. And this is also why, a lot of Democrats are willing to potentially put up with a Jay Clayton because it means someone other than Bill Pulte, who has had the keys to the intelligence apparatus for several weeks now. But you're right. The intelligence that's surrounding the war in Iran is something that the president was presented with in the Situation Room once again yesterday. It was a room full as he considers options for what might come next, with full-on war being one of them. And as the president made clear in an interview on Fox News, Kailey, civilian targets, infrastructure, power plants, etc., are still on the table and could be attacked as soon as next week. Listen.
I'll save the energy targets for last, but ultimately we'll hit energy targets, yeah. But we're going to hit them very hard tonight. We're going to hit them very hard tomorrow night. We're going to hit them very hard the night after. And then next week it gets really bad for them because next week comes the power plants. Next week comes the bridges.
So let's get more into this now as to whether or not this threat is real or just an attempt by the president to get Iran back to the table in a more meaningful way, as we turn to Chris Kennedy of Bloomberg Economics, who's here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. So, Chris, when we consider this threat once again to go after infrastructure, which we have heard from the president before, only for him to back off, is it more real this time now that he's proved willing to resume strikes against Iran in the absence of real deal making?
Well, we never know with the president, but clearly he's following through on the threats to continue strikes on Iran. We're seeing those strikes continue through today. We're seeing retaliatory strikes from Iran. And I think the broader point is that we're at a very precarious moment in this conflict. There's a real risk of further escalation that could cause lasting damage to Gulf energy infrastructure, for instance, or there's threats to open the conflict on other fronts, including in the Red Sea, which would cause further disruption.
So what would that mean for Iran's neighbors, if you will, if President Trump followed through with civilian targeting? Obviously, Iran would have some sort of response, whether that was asymmetric. What would it mean for Kuwait, for Jordan, we saw targeted, or even Israel?
Yeah, so far over the past few days, Iran has primarily been limiting its targeting to either vessels or to U.S. military installations in some of these countries. I think you would imagine that if the U.S. does actively target civilian infrastructure in Iran, you would see a similar response from Iran on some of its regional neighbors. Now, whether all of them or certain elements, I think it's to be seen, but clearly the risk of escalation is there. Water desalination plants are particularly sensitive type of infrastructure in the region. But energy export facilities, if they're targeted, it could take quite some time to bring those supplies back online, especially some of these LNG facilities like we saw targeted in the early stages of the war.
Well, and if we were to see that, or even with just what we are already seeing, would you assume, Chris, that the trajectory of oil prices is going to be one that continues higher for the time being?
I think for the time being, the market is digesting what's happening right now. We just had some new releases from U.S. Information on oil supplies. I think markets responded positively in the sense that oil prices tamped down a little bit based on that. But yes, I think if things stay where they are, even if they don't escalate, we're going to be entering another uncertain time. We've seen, emergency releases are continuing for now, but those will only last for so long. Probably by mid-October, we'll start to see those taper off. Yeah. And then China is a big wild card. They've really cut down their imports over the past couple of months. How long will that last?
Interesting. Goldman Sachs today warning of a rise back above $100 a barrel after Iran targeted a couple of UAE tankers. Chris Kennedy, we'd love to pull you into the conversation around defense spending today because we've got a couple of events we're looking at. We just heard from Tyler at this Pennsylvania event that Senator McCormick is running. The Aspen Security Forum is happening simultaneously, and the president is asking Congress for $1.5 trillion. You specialize in economic statecraft, and we can bend that in a couple of different ways. But when you consider the big stick here, the president's mantra has been, this is how you avoid forever wars, is by having an even bigger military. Will he get that money, and what will it mean in terms of psychological impact globally?
That's a great question. I think it faces an uphill battle on the Hill. Right now, the president, he's facing a lot of challenges, I think, from both his party and, of course, Democrats on the Hill. There are a lot of questions over this war. I think Congress wants to have more of a say in some of these interventions that we've seen the president undertake over the past several months, but also before. So I think it's going to be difficult. But, of course, the thesis, yes, of course, the U.S. is still the most powerful military in the world, but we're seeing the limits right now, and I think the entire world is seeing the limits.
I also want to ask you, as we consider whether or not he's going to get what he wants in terms of defense spending from Congress, whether or not sanctions, tighter sanctions related to Russia will be getting through Congress. As there's now a renewed push for this in the Senate in the aftermath of the death of Senator Lindsey Graham, who, of course, was spearheading this effort. This package, as we understand it, wouldn't mandate the president to do anything, but it would give him optionality in terms of people who consume Russian energy products, being able to impose 100% tariff. That right there is very real economic statecraft. Is that something that could be effective and potentially turn the tide of Russia's war with Ukraine?
That's a great question. So, I mean, the bill is interesting because, of course, the president, before his tariffs were thrown out by the Supreme Court in February, was imposing these secondary tariffs, tariffs on countries doing business with, Venezuela or, in any case, he's done this. Now he doesn't have that tool because of the Supreme Court. This bill would, for the first time, delegate this secondary tariff authority to the president. I would find it hard to believe the president would want to accept the bill as it's written because it does sort of lock him in. But I could imagine now, that he doesn't have this IEPA tool, that he would like some sort of congressional legislation that would allow him to, again, use his favorite tool, which is tariffs, in more creative ways.
He said yesterday, Kailey, and you probably heard this when he was in the Oval, he'd like to add Iran and Hezbollah to that legislation. Is that realistic, or Chris, does that slow it down?
I mean, we imagine there would be some additional markup on this bill. I'm sure the president would like to have as much flexibility as he could possibly get out of this legislation. Whether or not it's realistic, I think there are many on the Hill that are skeptical of the way in which President Trump has deployed tariffs. Whether they want to give him this tool at this point, we'll have to see.
He's on one of the best teams we have at Bloomberg Economics. Chris Kennedy leads our coverage of economic statecraft. It is great to have you with us, as always, Chris, as part of our conversation. We're going to play a lot of these themes to our panel coming up next. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are with us. But first, we stop down on the markets as we do every day at this time with Charlie Pellet, who's at World Headquarters in New York. Charlie, how's Wall Street looking?
Right now, we are higher. It's been a choppy day, Joe Mathieu. Lots going on. Let's get right to the numbers because we have got the S&P 500 index back in the green, barely up under 0.1% right now. Higher by 5. Indeed, a PPI Wednesday. We've got the S&P at 75.48. Dow Industrials flat on the day right now. Little change there. NASDAQ up 57, up 0.2%. However, the NASDAQ 100 index, full of those big tech names, it is down 0.7%. Very interesting divergence with the Bloomberg Mag 7 index pushing higher by 1.8%, and semis selling off again. We've got the SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange Semiconductor Index, down now by 3%. 10-year 4.54% with Kevin Warsh on Capital Capitol Hill. Spot gold down 0.4%, 4,037 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude lower, little change, down under 0.1%. Right now, WTI 79.28 a barrel. Briefly, Anthropic is planning IPO investor meetings as its mega listing nears. SpaceX falling below its IPO price for the first time as the hype fades. SpaceX now at $134.73. You recall it went out at $135. And the Yankees are said to be in talks for $3 billion in Apollo financing. Apple has received Chinese government approval to roll out Apple Intelligence in China. Apple now up by 3.6%. And from Apple to the Big Apple, New York City's air quality index has now deteriorated to, quote, unhealthy for everyone. This is wildfire smoke from Canada hits the Northeast. That's according to the EPA's airnow.gov tracker. It's recommended that people reduce strenuous outdoor activity and take extra breaks when indoors. Again, recapping, equities higher, little change. The key takeaway at this hour with the S&P up 6 points now, higher by 0.1%. Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. And he'll be back in just about 20 minutes' time with more on the markets as we connect the dots between policy and Wall Street trading every day here on Balance of Power. Thanks for being with us on the Wednesday edition. We've got our eyes, of course, on Pennsylvania, where President Trump is going to be traveling today. He'll be taking part in a roundtable discussion at the Carlisle, Pennsylvania Defense Summit, where we heard earlier this hour from Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall. President's there along with a number of luminaries from industry. Jamie Dimon is there, and it's a big conversation about not only how much we're spending, Kailey, but what we're spending it on. Drone companies, for instance, are expected to be a big player in this conversation today, with some deals expected to be announced when the president talks later.
Yeah, and of course, drones at top of mind for many in the community, defense community right now, and for this president, given what has been happening in the Middle East over the last several months. Yeah. In the aftermath of Operation Epic Fury, which I don't know if we're saying Operation Epic Fury is back on, or this is just a restart.
I think that's right.
Some operations. As, of course, the president earlier this week notified Congress that the war with Iran had resumed, trying to restart that 60-day clock for war powers. As we're seeing today, a fifth day of strikes, daylight strikes, in fact, announced by Central Command, which we haven't seen in some time. These usually happen over the evening. And, of course, President Trump, in an interview on Fox News yesterday, suggested that the strikes could escalate next week if Iran doesn't come back to the negotiating table, once again renewing his threats against energy infrastructure and civilian infrastructure like bridges and power plants. So we want to get into this now with our political panelists. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino join us. Rick, of course, is a Stonecourt Capital partner and Republican strategist. Jeanne, our Democratic analyst and democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Rick, just to begin with you, this is not a unique or novel threat made by President Trump. He has threatened this infrastructure repeatedly in the past, only to back down. Do you have the sense that this time would be different?
Hard to tell. I think the level of frustration is higher than it's been in the past. I think President Trump thought that he could cow the Iranians into not only completing the negotiations that had already started, but coming out with a deal. And the fact that the Iranians have slipped out of that noose and now continue to harass U.S. assets and maritime assets in the Gulf. I can't imagine how much more frustrated he must be. So we know this is a president that tends to govern through emotion. I'd love to have been a fly on the wall in the meeting that he had on Tuesday at the White House to talk about options, because I'm sure he was pushing our national security team to be ever more aggressive. So yes, I think there could be some especially symbolic hits against civilian targets that may be dual use, bridges, things like that, that the president will instruct in order to make a point. The question is, does any of this really have an effect on Iran? And we have not seen anything to date that the president's done that has cowed that leadership.
You know, in that same Fox interview, Jeanne, where the president talked about power plants and bridges next week, he was asked about Pickaxe Mountain, which is something that he discussed on the Hugh Hewitt program a day earlier. He said U.S. bunker busters can go deep, but claimed nobody knows if they can reach Pickaxe Mountain, where the U.S. is monitoring suspicious Iranian activity. They think that's where they want to shelter the nuclear program from airstrikes. Is that the kind of conversation that should be had publicly like this in the media?
No, it's not. But of course, that's in keeping with the way President Trump governs. He says everything, presumably publicly. And I think where we are today is we just have to look back at the June 17th MOU. We signed that MOU because Iran backed us into a corner. And we signed it because we had no military strategy to defeat Iran. And then once it was signed, we tried to open this separate Omani channel in the Persian Gulf. Iran was having none of it, saw it as a violation of the MOU, which it was. And we are back now to this tit for tat and these constant going back and forths, trading strikes. But the problem for the president, and by extension, the United States, is that nothing about this has changed. And the president does not have a clear winning strategy here. He's got a lot of, bombastic, threatening comments to make online and publicly. But beyond that, what is the strategy to defeat Iran? There is no military strategy, and you can't bomb somebody back to the negotiating table. And that's the dilemma we've been in, and that's the dilemma we continue to be in. I do think there are great people in the State Department with good ideas about how to move forward, but Donald Trump doesn't seem to be listening to them. He's listening to people like Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who, for all of the things that they have to offer, foreign policy negotiations are not amongst them. And so that's where we sit today.
Well, you have to wonder to what extent the president will listen to financial markets as well. As he previously said, he went for the memorandum of understanding, rather an all-out resumption of the war against Iran, because it risked economic catastrophe if the Strait of Hormuz remained closed and energy prices remained at the levels where they were. Of course, there's a lot of consternation around energy prices, and it isn't just affected by policy in the Middle East. It's also affected by policy here at home, and it's at the very heart of the debate around data centers in particular. We, of course, saw action in New York yesterday as the governor, Kathy Hochul, announced a one-year moratorium on data center construction in that state, and she talked about it on Bloomberg's Odd Lots podcast with Joe Weisenthal and Tracy Alloway. Listen.
I want to make sure that we take the time to have a community investment framework to give to localities, but also you have to be able to power yourselves. You either bring your own power source or you have to pay a premium to use our grid. And those are the basic foundations of what we're doing with this moratorium.
And this moratorium is not sitting well with President Trump, who took to Truth Social today to criticize Hochul and the state of New York, saying, in part, New York State has made a terrible decision, going on to say it should change its policy immediately. Quote, the radical left Democrats, he says, must not be allowed to cause us to lose data centers, AI, and all of this incredible new technology to China and other countries. Rick, I would love your thoughts on this. First, this notion of a data center moratorium in the first place, and whether or not it could be spreading throughout the country to other states, not just New York, and if that might ultimately include red states, not just blue states that are easy for the president to attack over.
Yeah, I think that there are two separate issues here. One is states are starting to set standards by which they will allow data centers to come into their state. And Kathy Hochul, governor of New York, just said, here are my standards, and it included you got to bring your own power. But then to apply a moratorium on top of that doesn't really make much sense. Here's what you got to do to be able to come into my state, but I'm not going to allow you to do that for a while until we really study this thoroughly. There is a race to deploy capital. There is a race to build infrastructure and capacity. And I think the kind of approach that Kathy Hochul's taken and some other governors around the country are basically keeping their states from benefiting from this immense amount of infrastructure development that's going on in the country right now. So yes, I think that there are going to be states because to have moratoriums, because they will follow the political crowd, right? They'll read the polls, say people, even though it doesn't affect them directly right now, boy, they're afraid of it because of what they read. But I think leadership is what makes a difference there, and giving standards to companies to do business in their state is perfectly acceptable. Why have a moratorium?
So where are we going here, Jeanne? The analysis at Bloomberg Intelligence says it all. New York statewide data center ban is first, likely not last. as we write, hyperscalers like Alphabet, Amazon, and Microsoft, as well as developers like Equinix and Digital Realty Trust, all, of course, deeply invested in this infrastructure, faced increased policy risk. BI is putting an 80% likelihood of comparable data center rules elsewhere. Is this just the beginning?
I think it is just the beginning. I have to tell you both, I have been stunned by the number of young people who, without me even raising this issue at universities and colleges, have expressed that their families are concerned about these data centers cropping up, and not just in New York, but around the country. Because it's not something I think many of us thought about, a year or two ago, 3 years ago. But boy, is it a big issue. We saw it in Virginia with energy crisis, New Jersey, and recent elections. Now here in New York, I think it spreads around. Polls on this are very difficult to sort of tease out, but Americans are concerned about the impact on their cost for them for their electricity. They believe that they're already paying a good amount. Now they're going to pay more. They're concerned about the impact on water usage. They don't want them in their neighborhood. We may all want to use these online, this as we go online, but we don't want them in our neighborhood. So I think this is going to be a growing issue. I think a lot of education has to be done here to help people understand the impact. And also, Joe and Kailey, I think we're going to see a lot more movement of attempts to put data centers in space, and that has an impact as well.
They go into space or under the ocean? I still haven't figured that out.
Elon Musk says they're going to space,
Depends
even though SpaceX dropped below the IPO price today.
Yeah.
Maybe not a lot of people buying that theory right now.
$133, I think, last time I looked. Rick Davis, Jeanne, Zaino, thank you. Our great panel, Bloomberg Politics contributors. Charlie Pellet will check markets, and SpaceX coming up right here on Bloomberg.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Most stocks pushing higher. Semiconductor names lower. However, Mag 7 stocks are higher as a group, but the NASDAQ 100 index down right now by 0.5%. This amid a rout in chip stocks. We're looking at the SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange Semiconductor Index, down now by 2.9%. The Dow and the S&P, they're both higher by 0.2%. NASDAQ doing a little bit better, up 0.4%. But again, the NASDAQ 100 index down 0.5%. The 10-year yield, 4.54%, with a 2-year currently yielding 4.13%. Gold up $4 the ounce. A little change there, up 0.1%, $4,057 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude now lower by 0.4%. WTI 79.04 a barrel. Brent 84.45 barrel of Brent, down by 0.3%. Earnings news: Johnson & Johnson among the names reporting this morning. J&J down now by 2%. SpaceX has fallen below its IPO price for the first time as the hype fades. SpaceX now at $134.83. SpaceX went out at $135. Anthropic plans IPO investor meetings as its mega listing nears, and the Yankees are said to be in talks for $3 billion in Apollo financing. And New York City's air quality index has now deteriorated to, quote, unhealthy for everyone. This is wildfire smoke from Canada hits the Northeast again. That's according to the EPA's airnow.gov tracker. Recapping, S&P up 15, up 0.2%. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Can't even see across town.
Yeah, doesn't look too pleasant up there. You stay safe, Charlie Pellet. I think we have it a little easier down here in D.C., even if we're suffering from yet another heat wave. Yeah. Something to behold. The president, of course, right now is about to escape D.C., go just a little bit further north as he heads to Carlisle, Pennsylvania, where he'll be speaking today at the Pennsylvania Defense and Innovation Summit, talking, presumably, about the need for more spending in defense in the United States and investments in the defense industrial base, in particular, into new technologies equipped to fight the wars of the present and future, of course, all shaped by the conflict ongoing with Iran. Because, yes, we are calling it an ongoing conflict now. The president has notified Congress of as much. We're now 5 days into renewed strikes against Iranian targets. And the president, as we've told you, told Fox News last night that those strikes could very well escalate next week.
Yeah, he says we'll be hitting power plants and taking down bridges if, in fact, this continues into next week, which remains a question. The president was in the Situation Room with his top military advisors just yesterday. J.D. Vance, who's on Capitol Hill today, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, the Defense Secretary, along with the chair of the Joint Chief of Staff, CIA Director, White House Envoy Steve Witkoff, and other senior officials. It was a room full, Kailey, as he's trying to manage this situation, and maybe he'll shed some light on this when he speaks later on in Pennsylvania. It's a big topic of conversation on the other side of the country as well, in Colorado, where the Aspen Security Forum is underway. Bloomberg's David Gura is there, as a matter of fact, and he spent some time with one of the forces behind Aspen, and that would be Nicholas Burns, the former U.S. ambassador to China, who's in fact vice chair of the Aspen Strategy Group and the Security Forum, weighed in on what's happening in Iran. Let's listen.
I think it's crystal clear right now that this ceasefire agreement has fallen apart, that it's not being honored by the government of Iran, that there's substantial differences between the United States and Iran on what that ceasefire agreement said. The Iranians believe, I think erroneously, that they get to run the Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz. They get to be the toll keeper, exact fees, establish a fee structure. There's not a government in the world that agrees with that. And I don't see any way that President Trump can ever agree to that. That would mean Iran emerges from this long war of 4.5 months stronger in that respect than when the war began. It would be injurious to the global economy, to insurance companies, to shippers, to people the companies that depend on the free flow of commercial traffic. So I think that the president cannot, and I believe will not give in, our president, on that issue. I don't think the Iranians are going to give in. So where does that leave us? I think a cat and mouse, probably next couple of weeks or months leading into the autumn, where there's a back and forth. They agree to a ceasefire. The ceasefire is honored, then not honored. They go back to exchange of fire. And I think that's where we are, because these are hard-bitten, highly ideological leaders in Iran. They think they can play us for time, and so they're testing us. It's very important that President Trump stands up to them in that respect and not give in on issues like Iranians becoming the Tony Soprano of the Strait of Hormuz, exacting tribute from other countries.
If Steve Witkoff were to give you a call, or Jared Kushner, what counsel would you give them about how to move forward here? It sounds like what you're prescribing or anticipating is a long period where things are effectively stuck.
Well, certainly I wish President Trump and his team well. We want them to succeed on behalf of the United States. I do think the original agreement, was not well done. A lot of loopholes. The Iranians are trying to race through the loopholes. So on the one hand, you may need to go back and renegotiate this, and that could take a substantial amount of time. I don't think it's reasonable to expect that there's going to be a perfect deal, perfectly arrived at and implemented anytime soon. I think we're going to be in a period of instability in terms of shipping through the Strait, a low-intensity conflict between the United States and Iran, major disagreement on the future of the Strait. I see this going into the autumn.
Any of this a surprise to you, based on how it's all unfolded?
It's not. I must say I was the first Iran nuclear negotiator for President George W. Bush, Condi Rice, 20 years ago, a long time ago. But you took the measure of them then. They haven't changed.
Former U.S. ambassador to China, and of course, longtime State Department dignitary across multiple administrations, Nicholas Burns, now the co-chair of the Aspen Security Forum, in conversation with our colleague David Gura yesterday, weighing in on what he sees as something that could take a while here, this conflict between the U.S. and Iran, which in his mind at least could take a great deal longer to come to a firm resolution. And the question, of course, is how much money it may need to spend, the U.S. may need to spend in this interim period as we see renewed strikes against Iran. Of course, we are looking at a request to Congress for supplemental funding for the war in Iran, and it looks like that is going to be at least attempted to be rolled into a third reconciliation package. The package is $95 billion in total. More than $70 billion of that would be for the Defense Department. The question, of course, is whether or not it has a chance of getting through both chambers, as there don't appear to be offsets embedded in this package in particular. And it's on that note that we start with Bloomberg Politics contributor and former chair of the House Financial Services Committee, also former Speaker Pro Tem, Patrick McHenry, who is back with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Mr. Chairman, good to have you as always. Your former colleague, Warren Davidson, is pointing to the lack of offsets in particular and saying, therefore, that this is going to be a no-go. Does this $95 billion package have a chance at getting through?
It has a chance, but this is really a test of political wills. On Capitol Hill,
You have fractious majorities in the House and the Senate that are really tight for Republicans. The House is particularly challenged at passing legislation over the last month. Had been locked down over debate on immigration. It appears that House Republicans have a plan forward for reconciliation, a partisan package that will not need Democratic votes in the U.S. Senate to get enacted. It totals nearly $100 billion. Some of this deals with election security, voter ID, and immigration issues domestically that can help sweeten the pot, as well as these important defense priorities. What this means is House Republicans are trying to go around Democratic opposition to this president and this president's intervention in Iran, and ensure that Democrats won't have a point of leverage to bring in their spending policies and priorities and other domestic priorities into the debate. So therefore, the package is smaller, they're saying to fellow Republicans. This package is smaller than the deal they would have to do with Democrats necessary to get their support and their votes. So in that way, Congressman Davidson is exactly right. This is an expensive package, but the alternative here is a more expensive package done with the support of Democratic lawmakers. That's really the narrow scope of the narrow range of scope and debate they're having on Capitol Hill in order to get this package done. And over the next couple of days, tomorrow will be a crucial day for House Republicans on getting that bill through the Budget Committee.
Yeah. All right. So let's say Speaker Johnson, Mr. Chairman, pulls a rabbit out of a hat, and he's done it before this thing actually comes out of committee and it passes the House. What happens next door in the Senate?
Well, the Senate, look, we have the untimely passing of Senator Lindsey Graham and his sister's quick appointment to that seat. We have Mitch McConnell, who is ailing. And so you have an attendance problem in the U.S. Senate, and you have a disagreement on the approach as well on immigration and these domestic priorities on voter ID. So this is going to be a second very, very narrow path through the U.S. Senate. But as you said, Speaker Johnson has pulled a rabbit out of the hat before with the help of President Trump. And I think likewise, Leader Thune will be able to get this package through if it's able to get out of the U.S. House, which then unlocks a second process. Once you have a budget resolution, that is just the opening act for them to actually write this policy, and to pull that rabbit out of that hat is a second sort of tricky set of things that need to happen. This is it's a lot to do in a July of a midterm election year, but a necessary priority for the president to see this through the Congress.
I'd like to ask you about something else the president has called a priority. In fact, he mentioned that this should be passed in honor of the legacy of Senator Lindsey Graham after his passing, which you mentioned, which is the Clarity Act, which it's not clear that Senator Graham was particularly passionate about crypto market structure in particular, but there are many that are. And Politico is reporting that tomorrow at the White House, a group of senators will be meeting with the president about the path forward for this legislation. Mr. Chairman, are they going to have to tell the president if he wants to see this done, he's going to have to agree to restrictions on the actions of him and his family in the crypto space?
Well, that's certainly what the Democratic senators are saying, is their objection to passing Clarity. Look, this path to getting clear law on crypto is really the ethics issue for elected officials and for the private sector, frankly. We need to define what is a digital asset and its means of exchange. We currently don't have any federal law dictating those two things on a very important, very large market that now traditional finance is getting heavily engaged in. So frankly, the pitch here is that ethics is downstream of us actually having sound law and a clear set of rules and regulations at the federal level. That's what Clarity will bring. The opposition by Democratic lawmakers here, I think, is really trying to bring this into the political debate about the president's financial disclosure statement and his engagement across financial markets and investment activities, business activities for he and his family. That is a separate issue than having sound law on crypto, which is what the Clarity Act would bring about. it's really an open question whether or not the Democrats in the Senate will stand firm in opposition unless we have some additional ethics language here for government officials, most specifically the president and vice president. A lot's going to be riding on this test vote the Senate will have on clarity, hopefully next week or the following week.
30,000-foot view, Mr. Chairman. There are real concerns about whether anything is going to get out of this Congress between now and the lame duck. Sarah Chamberlain from the Republican Main Street Partnership said in our studio yesterday that the store is basically closed. We'd be lucky to get a CR right now, and she expects the government likely will shut down for some period of time and could, in fact, be a lengthy one following the end of September. How about you?
Well, I think a government shutdown is more likely than not on September 30th. And that's because we saw the Democratic Party pay no price for the longest government shutdown in American history, led by Democratic Senate opposition. And so because they didn't pay a political price then, they believe they're unlikely to pay a political price this fall. I think that is a really tricky thing for the Congress to negotiate. That is also why they're pushing this Reconciliation 3.0 so intently. Defense supplementals have always been bipartisan over the last decades. And now you see Republicans facing unified Democratic opposition to replenishing our stocks and supplies of weaponry. That's why they're going this partisan path. That doesn't make a government shutdown more likely. It probably, it doesn't make a government shutdown less likely. It probably makes it more likely in the fall. But time will tell. And politics, especially these days, is quite fickle day to day and week to week.
Well, not the truth. We're always lucky to have you walk us through it. Patrick McHenry, Bloomberg Politics contributor, former congressman, of course, Republican, former Speaker pro tem. He actually held the gavel for some time, and I feel like he's still really glad that he's not doing that anymore.
Yeah, although I wonder if he missed chairing the Financial Services Committee, which had the chance to question the new chair of the Federal Reserve, Kevin Warsh, this week.
Fair enough. French Hill had pretty efficient process today, I will say. We're going to head up to the Senate. I'll meet you up there for the late edition at 5 p.m. Eastern. Dramatic day on Capitol Hill. This is Bloomberg.